Good afternoon. We are here for a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee work session. We have two items on our agenda, and we are going to start with our first item here. Item number one is zoning text amendment 2502. This is a continuation of our workforce housing development standards conversation. We began this conversation before budget. We're coming back now after budget, and we're going to just dig into the details here. Let me turn it over to Ms. Nadeau to walk us through the packet, and we can turn it over to planning as needed. We did ask for diagrams and pictures. Want to appreciate Mr. Sharma, who I believe has made new arrangements for himself to be here, to be able to present to us, and worked it out with his family. So thank you really to your family for indulging that and your commitment to being here. But we had requested some diagrams and information at our last work session, so we're going to go through and take a look at that today as part of our discussion. So with that, let me turn it over to council staff, and we'll just walk through the packet and we'll go through the discussion items as they arise.
So as noted, the first work session on this was on March 24th. That staff report went through a lot of questions and answers thus far, and there's a link in the staff report to find that. There's a link online to find that staff report. As noted, no votes were taken then. So the way today's work session packet works is it'll cover the pending issues for discussion, questions committee members had, such as the diagrams on consolidation and potential amendments. So I'm just going to dive in. The very first one is a question about controlled highways, asking whether controlled major highways should be removed. So a controlled major highway is a road meant for through movement of vehicles, but at a lower speed than a freeway. There is a table in the staff report that lists all of these parcels. There's a few that are in Germantown. They tend to be more up-county parcels, and a portion of those do have single-family houses with driveways and curb cuts. So a recommendation from the planning board was to remove controlled major highways. This was discussed at the work session in March, and planning had reported that these roads are wide, usually 4 to 6 lanes, with speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour. Just to remind everyone, the reason that these controlled major highways were in here is that some of them cover our state roads. And lastly, that there are 27 parcels that would be impacted by this change. So that is the first potential amendment, if the committee wishes to discuss it, recommended by the planning board.
Any comments?
Okay. I'll just make one quick one.
Councilmember Toronto.
Thank you. Yeah, and the list, just for, as you did in the packet, is that list on pages 2 and 3 at
Correct.
Bottom of 2.
Yeah, bottom of 2.
Right. So like starting with Sandy Spring 198, and then Greencastle. And the definition of, could you just restate the controlled major highway? What defines a controlled major highway? Because I think one of the questions we've gotten from some people is, well, there's other roads on here that have a lot of lanes, and that basically function as highways in the county, but are not controlled major, because that's a definition. Could you just speak to that?
Right, for sure. So I think it was maybe 2 years ago, planning and then the council went through all the different road types and came up with what ended up being sort of more categories. So highway doesn't always mean necessarily what we picture as a highway. So as defined in the county code, a controlled major highway is meant for through movement of vehicles at a lower speed than a freeway, and access must be limited to grade-separated interchanges at grade intersections with public roads. So they're busier than a boulevard, but not as busy as a freeway. Boulevards are included in ZTA 2502.
Right, which might be some of the things that people would think in their mind, like might be operate as a highway. And obviously, I'm in support of removing these, but just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we're good to continue.
So the next one, actually, let me pause here and ask a question of the committee and the chair. So what I will do is note just like 2112 on all the different amendments, and then that'll be the staff report for council, or if there's another committee session. Does that work for moving forward?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So next is, will the applicable corridors be affected by the proposed changes to the master plan of highways and transitways? So quick edit to the staff report here. I wrote that planning board is reviewing it. Council has received it. And T&E is actually currently reviewing that technical update to that master plan. Going through that master plan of highways and transitways, the biggest impact on this ZTA is that those road types we mentioned earlier are changing. So it's adding a growth corridor area type and a growth corridor boulevard type. The impact on the ZTA would be, right now, it says boulevard, downtown street, town center boulevard, and controlled major highway, and those terms will be slightly out of date. So the recommendation from council staff is, instead of listing each boulevard, to just say a boulevard street classification. That way, depending what the council does with the master plan of highways and transitways, it'll be reflected appropriately. And as a reminder, the committee actually had made that amendment to ZTA 2501, which was approved in April.
We didn't take votes, but we did express an interest in consistency here at the previous committee work session. Unless there's any,
I'm fine with it. But
Councilor Madrona.
Yeah, I'm fine. I appreciate that and fine with that. I did want to elevate a request that was made that's relevant here by some of the municipalities in Chevy Chase in their March letter. They'd asked that the eligible lots be clearly identified as the effective date of the ZTA by an appendix that maps the eligible lots and identifies them by address or eligible lot or both. It's important because there have been some discrepancies as we've gone along here between the defined terms and what is actually shown on the map. And on my own end, when I tried to drill down, for example, on Democracy Boulevard, and we've talked about this, which parcels were not applicable, I wasn't able to 100% know that right off the bat. I had to ask several more questions. So if my colleagues agree, all I'm asking is that there be an agreement that there be, if something were to pass, an appendix that would come that could list out the lots and or the addresses that are actually eligible. I mean, is that doable?
So what I might recommend is, so right now there's the map that's online that shows the eligible parcels. Would it work to, after adoption, any amendments that are made, like such as like if controlled major highways or corner lots or the other things we're going to discuss get removed, that map be updated and remain online once the ZTA is passed? Or did you want a chart listing, because listing each address might get hard?
I mean, I would love to have planning's input. My only goal here is just clarity of, so everyone is 100% clear of whatever happens, this is what's eligible, these are the properties and parcels. If that can be done to the map, you can get that close. I think both and would be great if there was a list, but you tell me what you think is workable based on, hopefully you understand my.
Yeah, for the record, Jason Sartori, Planning Director. My understanding is you're asking if we can somehow basically lock down, here are the parcels that this applies to, the ones that it would apply to today, and that if future road classification changes might in the future make a parcel eligible, it wouldn't be because it wasn't identified today as being eligible. I don't know if we've done anything like that in the past with zoning changes and zoning text amendments where we've said, here's all it applies to, and it can never change going forward if conditions change.
I'm not asking you saying it can never change. I'm just saying, just so that people can know have the actual really good access to the list, not just in the map form. I'm not saying, obviously, if this passes and there's some sort of property that
Is eligible.
Yeah. for that would, in the future. Yeah. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to say that wouldn't be included.
Okay. Well, I mean, I suppose we could we could translate the map into a list of potential parcels that could be associated on the map.
Because I've heard the list, I've heard the number before. It's X number of whatever parcels that are eligible. So I'm assuming
we have a list.
It's based on something. It might just be making that available. I don't, the back end work.
I would imagine it'd be no problem to be able to apply that to the map that on our website already.
Can I make a suggestion? I'm supportive of idea of it. I think the question is the implementation of it and what makes sense and doesn't make sense and what's doable and not doable. So this isn't a policy question, it's a request for an addition, to be posted somewhere in some type of addendum form or posted on a website or, et cetera. It's not a zoning text question or an eligibility question. It's really a communication question. So why doesn't planning go back, talk internally, figure out, what form that could take, what that looks like, what is doable, and then just come back to us and say, here's what, based on the request, here's what we came up with. Does this satisfy the request? Does that work?
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, one more thing though.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I have no problem with that. As you work in that exercise, can you also, in the map, and this is a request that I heard from a couple of people, the map shows, for example, county-owned properties like the library, and we already have a disclosure in the map saying, yes, you can see that property in blue, but it's county-owned. We're not looking to change the Wheaton Library into a duplex at all. But I'm wondering, after you work on that, if you can change the color of those properties that are county-owned, that we know it's not gonna go through this at all, but it will be easier for people to identify that, okay, it's there because it fits the criteria, but it's county-owned, it's not gonna change to duplex. So just the color of that particular property in the map, that's all. Thank you.
Essentially, a different color for public-owned,
Yeah.
for public-owned property. To give a more realistic understanding of what is in play essentially and what isn't. Because there's been some concern and some confusion about that and some public comments that have been made, and that would help clarify.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I think that's two good suggestions here. You'll come back to us and let us know how you're going to implement that. Again, these are not policy questions, they're more clarity and communication dynamics, but I think they're important that we flesh out, so. All right, agreement on the policy question, as we had talked about before and as the committee has done previously with consistency on that, and then the couple requests in general on the communication side of things that you're going to come back to us with, both with the map and another form to be able to search for individual properties, separate from a map.
So next is a discussion of corner lots on whether corner lots should be included. So the way that the ZTA works, a corner lot would only be eligible if it's its front lot line that is on the applicable corridor. So if there's a corner lot where the front lot line's on the corridor, or sorry, their side line is on the corridor, but the front is actually on a side street, those lots would not be eligible under the ZTA. There was a question raised about whether they should be included since they tend to be larger, and planning had noted they might not need more curb cuts, but that also would mean that that front lot line might be more on a different type of street that was originally in the ZTA. Planning and council staff were asked to find how many parcels this would mean. So after looking at the map, including the corner lots with side lot lines on an applicable corridor would add 475 lots in the number of eligible lots for this CTA. So I wanted to provide that information. Yeah, 475.
Colleagues, Councilmember Funny Gonzalez.
I do agree with this, 100%. I think you should include them. We need more housing, and I just don't see why we will say no, but that's my opinion.
You want me to go next?
You can, if
Okay.
feel free.
Yeah, I do not agree with this. I think we've heard from the majority of the community that around the corner lot issue and the CTA in general, people have been overwhelmed with it. Asked why we're not going through the master plan process for these things. Again, I'm conceptually fine with zoning changes being part of the mix, but I don't think increasing this by 20% or adding almost 500 parcels makes sense, and I would not support it.
Yeah, I very much understand the interest in adding more parcels. and the need for more housing. Obviously, that's a big part of why this is being introduced, why I worked very hard with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez and others to figure out how we could try to thread the needle to address concerns that had been raised throughout the unprecedented amount of public outreach that we did and try to figure out how to figure out a path forward. I do understand the argument that some have made that the corner lots actually allow you to address some of the concerns because there's multiple opportunities for egress and ingress, and some of the parking and access dynamics could be more easily resolved than perhaps within a block. Having said that, it's a huge increase in the number that was originally presented. It was not included in what we have consistently shared with the public as part of this. I'm trying very hard to move forward with the consensus that we have been able to get on this proposal without having dramatic increases or decreases in the number of parcels that would be eligible. There are proposals on both sides, some of which would add a tremendous number of parcels, some of which would reduce a significant number of parcels. I think there are valid reasons to do both from a policy standpoint, but my interest is to try to keep as consistent to what we have shared with the proposals we had put forward from the beginning. I understand the merits of it, but I think in consistency with what we have said of what abutting to a major corridor is and what the intention was when we move forward, this was not included in the original proposal, and I think that we shouldn't add it at this point. So I'm not going to support adding it. I'll stick with the proposal as it was originally introduced, which would not include these 475 parcels. So that would be a 2-to-1 vote, or, yeah.
Next is service roads. So service roads do front on the applicable corridor, so they would be subject to the ZTA. To picture a service road, it's those roads, I believe Norbeck has quite a bit, because that's my way here, where you're on the main road and there's like a strip of grass and then more houses, and they usually have sort of their own little side street, is how I would describe a service road. So those are fronting on the corridor, so they are currently included in the ZTA. However, the street that makes up that piece of the service road would not count in vehicle travel lanes, because remember, a road's only applicable if it's 3 or plus lanes. So that's a summary of how the service roads currently work. Testimony was received regarding traffic and other parking on service roads. As introduced, the ZTA did not reduce parking requirements. I know we'll discuss more of that later. And also, sorry, it's so late in the staff report. The number of eligible parcels is 2,470. Of that number, 630 are along service roads, so it's about 25% of the ZTA is introduced as parcels on a service road. This was discussed at the last work session. Planning board and council staff noted that these are roads designed for residential use and may provide better traffic conditions because cars wouldn't exit directly onto the major road. But of course, there's also community concerns that these might be more like quiet neighborhood streets. So that's the tee up for the discussion on service roads.
Okay, well, this is kind of the exact opposite of the prior. This was the equal and opposite dynamic, as I was noting before. Some of the discussion items that we have would dramatically increase, and some of which would dramatically decrease the number of parcels. I'm not particularly comfortable with any changes that are that dramatic on one side or the other. I think it's hard for us to do that. I noted before, this is a double-edged sword with service roads, in the sense that on the one hand, there are more opportunities to address some of the issues. On the other hand, they are a lot more like a neighborhood road. They're designed that way. And so there's a give and take here. You could make a public policy argument. I think either way, my best view of it is it's a dramatic reduction in the number of parcels, quite similar to the addition that the previous item would have been, that I didn't support for the reason that I thought it was a dramatic change. So same view on this, but don't think that we should make that level of change for the exact same, but perhaps opposite, or the same reason, opposite result, so to speak. But I'll open it up to colleagues as well.
You know what I'm going to say.
Gonzalez?
I definitely support keeping the service roads. I think these are ideal locations to have this type of redevelopment happening. They're safer, if you think about it, and I want to keep it. That's all.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. We talked about this last time. This gets at a couple of issues I have with the overall ZTA and how it's developed, in that, one, all service roads are not the same. Some are much more narrow, some serve primarily as, kids playing and doing things, and particularly if you're talking in the East County, but in other parts of the county as well. They're neighborhood, roads. So I worry about that. I also am worried about the issue of displacement, which I've talked about on these corridors, where some of these service roads are. We have data telling us that 20%, I think it's around 20%, Ms. Nadeau can correct me if I'm wrong, but the houses on these corridors cost about 20% less than in the neighborhoods. And part of the reason, and many of them are homes to, working class homeowners or renters. And I'm concerned that, so I'm seeking to limit that, what I think will be a disproportionate impact on those communities. So I think by removing service roads, you could get at that concern as well. So I would err on, I see the arguments on the other side too. I do think that there are some intellectually honest arguments on the other side of this, but I would err on the side of excluding them for the reasons I've stated. So that's where I would be. Obviously, it would offer that, so I think I would be in the one on this one.
Yeah, so opposite 2-1 vote on this one, but in both cases, they're 2-1 votes to keep the zoning text amendment language as drafted, to not, approve an amendment. So in some ways, they're really 1-2 votes to amend the bill as drafted, I think is probably the more appropriate way to draft it, but it doesn't matter how you choose to list it. We're not making a change in the previous, and we're not making a change here, and they're 2-1 or 1-2 votes. There's one dissent in both cases.
Yeah,
Just for
I'll flush it out, because I
clarity's
think
sake.
it is confusing which ways.
Yeah, I just think it's important to note that there were suggestions of whether or not there would want to be a change. The previous one would have expanded, and this one would have reduced by a fairly similar number, of a substantial number, the eligible parcels. In both cases, the committee is not accepting the changes to either significantly increase or significantly reduce the number of parcels for the reasons stated. Okay?
So next is consolidation. So Chapter 50 of the zoning ordinance is where the subdivision regulations are. The zoning ordinance is Chapter 59. So any changes to the subdivision process, and subdivision means consolidating, re-subdividing, all of that is in a different chapter and not under a ZTA. That's what we call an SRA, and it's a different measure that would have to be introduced and passed separately from this ZTA. But I wanted to explain how consolidation would work based on the current subdivision regulations. So first is that adjoining lots can be consolidated if they both front on the corridor, because those are both eligible parcels. If one lot fronts on the corridor and the lot behind it fronts on a neighborhood street, and you consolidate those, that's what we call a through lot. Through lots can only be approved under unique circumstances. The board has to approve them. You need unusual topography, orientation, or size. And also the development standards would be adjusted. So what would be considered the rear is now also going to be subject to front development standards in terms of setbacks. So it would be hard to develop on them, and the standard would be very high. Similar to through lots are flag lots. So if you want to picture a flag lot, it's kind of a skinny driveway and then a big lot behind another house. Those can be approved if the board finds unusual topography, environmental conditions, or the position of the tract make no other way to subdivide, But with flag lots, you need 80 feet of separation around the building. So again, very difficult lots to build on. Next, if one lot fronts on the corridor and then the neighboring lot does not, for example, a corner lot, those lots could be consolidated and then the resulting lot would be eligible for the ZTA. Next, when you consolidate, the development standards would apply to the larger lot. And then I think lastly, same thing in reverse. If you make smaller lots, if you consolidate and then break it up, again, the development standards apply to those new smaller lots. So during the last work session, Chair Friedson had asked for a diagram showing the various ways you can consolidate. And I believe what we will have here are consolidation in each zone, because each zone has different size lots, and then also with both 2 and 3 lots. And I will pass it on to Mr. Sharma.
Thank you. For the record, Atul Sharma with the Planning Department. So last time, as Ms. Nadu noted, the committee members had wanted to see some visual representations of what could happen in lot consolidation. So we did a series of exercises that show what potentially could be fit on these different zone lots when you have a 2-lot consolidation and a 3-lot consolidation. And this presentation follows the same format for the R60 zone, the R90 zone, and the R200 zone. We didn't do a separate exercise for the R40 zone because the development standards for the R40 and the R60 are almost identical, and there are very few properties that are R40 zoned in the county today. So if we go to the next slide, just want to highlight a few things we learned doing this exercise that are worthy of noting. One, that lot consolidation did provide flexibility to the sites, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get a higher density development on these sites. And there are some specific reasons for that, and I'll get into those in the following bullets. Most of the development scenarios we tested, and we used very sound market responsive floor plan and gross square footage assumptions for these building types. Most developments, even with lot consolidation, actually don't achieve the maximum permitted FAR of 1.25. Most of the examples that you'll see on your screens in the following slides range in a maximum FAR that can be achieved with consolidation from 0.6 to 0.9. So none of these even got to 1.0 FAR, let alone 1.25 FAR. And the reason for that is that the ZTA actually has some really good controls beyond just FAR that are baked into the draft legislation that's in front of the committee today. These include things like lot coverage, building height, building setbacks, the provision of on-site parking spaces, as well as the requirement to provide space for stormwater management on your lot. So when you put all this together, it creates a practical limit to how much you can build on these lots, even when you consolidate them. The two factors that have the biggest impact on bringing that practical limitations are on-site parking spaces and lot coverage. Those two in combination or even independently have a very direct impact on how much stuff you can put on these lots in terms of buildings. The highest density study that you'll see in these slides is an apartment building that uses either a half basement or underground parking. Even those do not exceed about 0.9 FAR, and those are unlikely scenarios because the cost of doing underground parking is really, really high. An underground parking space can cost anywhere between $50,000 to $75,000 per space to build, so that's a huge cost. So if you go to the next slide, we'll walk you through the scenarios for each of the zones. So it follows the same format. On the first slide, you see 2 lots. So this is R60. You're looking at 2 lots that are 60 foot by 100 foot. They are combined or consolidated. And the tan color is the maximum allowed lot coverage. In the dark green along the edges are the setbacks, and the light green or the lime green is just the rest of the lot. And so you see that for 2 lots, and you see that for 3 lots on the right-hand side. The ZTA does not change parking requirements as drafted, so the parking requirements are listed on the bottom table as well as they would apply to each of these. So if you go to the next slide, you see a two-lot consolidation and what you could theoretically put on that. So what you're seeing here are 4 townhouse-type units kind of attached side by side. There's a couple of pictures of what these buildings might look like on the top right corner. They cover about 27% of the lot, which is less than the 35% lot coverage. They provide 8 parking spaces on the lot, 2 per unit. The range of the dwelling units is 1,600 to 2,000, although that could be higher if you have habitable space in the attic or if you add a basement living space to the units. And you can see the achieved FAR for this type of a layout is about 0.6. If you go to the next slide, this is what a 3-lot consolidation might look like for R60. You can get 2 clusters of townhouse-type units, as you can see, with a driveway between the buildings that gets to the parking in the back. They still are under that 35% lot coverage. They provide 2 spaces per unit in general. And the FAR achieved is about 0.7, and here are a few photographs of what the building on the left, which is 3 units, might look like, and then the building on the right, which is a longer string of townhouses, might look like. If you go to the next slide, this is showing you what a multi-unit apartment building might look like with surface parking. So you can see here 2 buildings. So each of these buildings that are drawn has 2 units on the ground floor, so they are like accessible units on the ground floor, and then 2 more units that are 2 floors each on the upper floors. And there's 2 buildings sitting next to each other, and then the parking that is required to accommodate the number of units in here. So this has 8 dwelling units, 14 parking spaces, because you're not doing workforce housing, so the requirement for workforce housing is 1 per unit, so which is why it's not 16, it's 14. And even in this scenario with apartments, you can see you're getting to an FAR of about 0.83, and here are some representative examples of what these buildings might look like. And I'll go faster through the rest of them because it's kind of like the same recipe over for each of the lots. So 2 and 3 lots again for R90. The lots are 9,000 square feet each. The parking is the same. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see what a 2-lot consolidation might be able to fit, which is about 6 units on it, which might look like that image on the right. But again, even in the bigger lots, because the lot coverage is constricted, the height is limited, you get to about 0.6 FAR by the time you end up accommodating all the parking and other requirements on site. And the lot coverage is actually only 27%, which is well below what the ZTA would allow as a maximum. Moving forward, this is 2 lots with the apartment buildings that we talked about before. These are a total of 8 units, so 4 in each of those 2 increments of that building, 14 spaces on site. And this is getting into some of the higher achieved FARs in these studies, so it's about 0.83. And we can sort of cycle through the next few. This is 3 lots on R90 showing townhouses. You're getting 9 units, 18 parking spaces, about 0.6 FAR. If you do apartments, you can get up to 12 units in this scenario. But you can see by the time you end up placing the buildings and the parking on site and meeting all the setbacks, you run out of space to do more. So there's a practical limit to what can be put on these lots per the development standards in the ZTA. So this example is probably the highest density that we saw in all of these studies. These are 3 R90 lots. The building actually on the right-hand, top right is in the county. That's a building in King Farm. It's a corner apartment building with parking behind it. So you can see here, there's a half level or a full level of underground parking where you come in with the driveway and go down and park under the building. And you get about 12 total units, so 6 units on each floor above that parking level. And you need about 20 parking spaces for that per the current zoning code requirements. And the FAR is again in the 0.8, 0.83 range. I think we can go through these pretty quickly, and it's the same thing for R200. You see 2 and 3 lots. You can get better layouts on bigger lots, but not necessarily more density, because you still have to get separation between buildings, circulation to get to all the parking. So you can get some common spaces that are better defined and larger in these R200 lots, but not necessarily a higher FAR. And I think that's getting to the end here, just showing different iterations of 3 R200 lots here. I think some multifamily buildings. And this is probably the biggest building that we were able to fit in any of the studies. This was a 29-unit building on 3 R200 lots with about 48 parking spaces. But the achieved FAR is 0.6, which is less than half of what is maximum allowed. So in summary, I think the ZTA has some FAR requirements for sure. There are thresholds you can't cross, but by the time you put in all the other rules in place, it puts a reasonable limit on the size of development that could sit on a large road as is envisioned in the ZTA. And yeah, we thought this is what the council wanted to see, the members wanted to see, so we prepared this for your deliberations today.
Appreciate it. I'll open up to any questions that colleagues have on the scenarios, the different dynamics and scenarios that you were able to put forward. I just want to reiterate a couple points. Number one, consolidation, in order for that to occur, you have to go through subdivision. So could you just explain, because I think that there is, the way that this has been talked about is that it's the same process to go through optional method to get your development of your duplex or your triplex, on a single lot as if you consolidated multiple lots. That's not exactly how it works. There's 2 separate individual processes. You'd have to first go through subdivision, and then you could go through potentially an optional method process. So I think it'd be helpful just to explain that, just to make sure that it's understood, because I think it's been talked about in a way that glosses over that. I just think it's helpful for everybody to understand on all sides of this issue. So why don't we start there?
So if I understood the question, kind of what process of subdivision you would go through for each type.
I would even take a step back. Explain what subdivision is, how a lot, a single lot could turn into 2 or 3 lots, potentially, like if somebody wanted to do that. Obviously, they'd have to purchase or own them, but in order to consolidate the lots, what does that process look like? And then what's the next step, in terms of optional method and going through the regular process?
So lot consolidation, if a property owner had 3 different lots and wanted to consolidate it, they'd go through just a lot line adjustment to consolidate all those properties. And that typically does not go through the longer process of subdivision, because it's consolidating properties together and eliminating lot lines. For a property that wants to create new lots, which goes through a subdivision, would go through our typical process. If we have, we do have an administrative preliminary plan or subdivision process that allows an applicant to create 3 new lots or up to 3 new lots administratively. It still goes through our public process where it goes to DRC. It still goes through our the public notification and the posting process. But if there's no relevant concerns about the issues of creating 3 new lots or up to 3 new lots, then it could be approved administratively. We have a number of those applications that do get approved administratively, but where we do have concerns that get raised, they get kicked to the board for their review in a public hearing. So that's the administrative process. Anything beyond 3 lots would go through our typical subdivision process, where it goes to DRC, it goes to the planning board for their full review. And that review is for lot width, lot character, making sure it meets development standards, but also making sure there's it meets all the criteria for Chapter 50, which is the subdivision regulations. And if it goes beyond that to any kind of site plan, then we go through that process again or in concert with the subdivision.
Okay, thanks. And then I'll just reiterate, the main factor here isn't even the 1.25 FAR. Almost all the scenarios come nowhere close to that level of density. That was there as kind of a stop, valve. It's really the fact that this, unlike the previous zoning text amendment that was introduced and other recommendations that were made by the planning board, if a duplex is being built, it would be held to the same development standards as a single-family house, as a current tear-down. And if anything other than a duplex is being built under this proposal, it's held to the lowest density townhome requirements. And that's where you get the lot coverage, the setback, and all of the other standards that essentially put significant limitations on what can be built. That is part of what was put forward and the reason why it was put forward, to ensure that there are those dynamics. And then the additional of the 40-foot height limit, which is actually lower than many townhome standards. Many townhome standards, I don't want to say most, but many townhome standards, I don't know the percentages, are 45 feet. Single-family home standards are at 35 feet, and this is at 40 feet. So 5 feet different, 5 feet taller, with the additional, setback, lot coverage, and other standards. And unlike the recommendations that came forward, that planning for reasons to reduce costs and to make more redevelopment more likely, recommended reducing parking requirements, because that's one of the main factors that limits what can be built. This proposal is not making any changes to those parking standards. It's one of the biggest concerns and questions that we heard throughout based on the public feedback. So I just wanted to reiterate that because I think it's really important. We're not making changes to what was introduced as recommended here. This shows what the existing limitations as put forward are and how they actually significantly reduce what can be built, and some of the inflammatory rhetoric, including from some public officials, of what can be built and what would it mean based on what has been introduced. If you look at the, what was included here, those are not, able to be built for the reasons noted. Having said that, we're more than welcome to say that what is being suggested here is more than people are comfortable with and more than what they would want. I think that's fair. I'm not trying to diminish that in any way, but I think it's important for us to focus on what actually can be built under what is before us and not creating hypothetical scenarios that are not in play and are not part of our current discussion. So I think it's important and helpful for us to hone in on that, and I appreciate all the work that went into coming up with those various different scenarios, because I know it's, it takes quite a lift in order to do that. Councilmember Funny-Gonzalez.
I agree with everything that Chair Fritzen has mentioned. When I was on the planning board, I took part of lots of subdivision applications, and they're not easy. And I would like to leave it the way it is, as you mentioned. And I love the corner lots images that you show, by the way. I feel I had to say that. That's all.
All right, any questions on the presentation, on what can and can't be allowed? And then we'll get into some discussion points and questions on consolidation and other dynamics.
Sure, yeah.
Councilmember.
Yes, thank you. The flag lots issue, and thank you for explaining that, Ms. Nadeau. Do we have a sense of how many flag lots are behind applicable parcels? There was one that was raised in, that I'm thinking of in Chevy Chase, where there was a request that the property in front of the flag lot not be subject to the ZTA because you have someone's house opening up to the back of an apartment building, which could be different. So do we have a sense of how prevalent this issue is, where there's a flag lot behind an applicable parcel?
I'm looking at him, seeing.
Probably not, right? Okay.
Not a shaking of the head. So no, we haven't looked at that. We could do that. It would probably, take a detailed, it would take a decent
Yeah.
amount of time to go through.
Okay,
See how many.
the reason I ask, one of the reasons I ask is because, we got one illustrative example, but one of the main challenges I have with this approach is that the county is not the same everywhere. And, we're very, but this takes a countywide approach to very different corridors. We talked about it in the context of the service roads, but if you just take the roads in general, and again, this is from someone who's not conceptually against the zoning change I've voted for many zoning changes, one of which I asked a question about, we'll talk about later, but it was just raised, the parking issue. I voted for the reduced parking, ZTA that we passed, which impacts almost a quarter of these lots, which we didn't even talk about until I raised the question, like no one had even mentioned it. That we went through this whole nice presentation and we didn't change parking, but yes, we did. A quarter of these lots have no parking requirement because of 2302, or whatever that ZTA is, 2310, excuse me. So, 500 lots that are in the ZTA have no parking requirements, just to be clear. And that was a previous policy decision. So it's nice to show these illustrative images, many of which I think look really nice, and I know where some of them are, but that's just not how the county's set up. And it's why the more I've gotten into this over the years, again, as the one who initially put forward a proposal to do something like this near transit stations, is that that's why we have the master plan process. That's why we look community by community. That's why we do it that way, because not everywhere is the same. And it's great if there's all this land and there's parking and there's space. Some of these things will work just great and they're good ideas, but that's not the county. And there's, as I've dug into this proposal, this several hundred pages over the last couple of months, more of these questions come up about what is impacted, how's it going to, and I just think it begs the question of why are we taking this approach this way? So I would be interested in the flag lot question, but some of the other suggestions we saw from some of the municipalities, for example, were saying, let's not have the chaining where it's an eligible lot adjacent to a non-eligible lot. Could we talk about how this is that, currently that is possible, right?
So can I just take the floor back for a minute? So I was opening it up to questions on the presentation itself. There's a broader question about consolidations itself. Consolidations happen during subdivision, so something that we talked about before. Consolidations happen during subdivision. The zoning text amendment is not specifically dealing with consolidations and how consolidations work, because that is an action of a subdivision and not of a zoning question. If you go through the packet, I have suggested to staff to put together an SRA accompanying this, which would address the subdivision question, which is specifically related to what, should and shouldn't be allowed related to consolidation, what would or wouldn't be eligible. If it's okay with you, I would recommend that we move on to that, allow staff to talk about that. I can express what at least I have put forward that's in the packet of suggesting to staff to put forward to try to find a way for us to address this. That could specifically address the flag lot issue, because I have made a specific suggestion on that, would specifically relate to the concern about consolidation of lots that that are back to back, one facing the neighborhood street, backed up to one facing the abutting eligible lot, and those be consolidating. As we heard from council staff, that's very unlikely, given topography and the other standards that have to be followed. That's very specific. But it's not impossible. It's not a never. And that's not a great answer when there's as much concern as there has been that this is almost never or highly unlikely to happen. We can't credibly say it can't happen. And so the option, if we want to say that it can happen, because that was never the intention as this was put forward, is there has to be an SRA that, prohibits that during subdivision. But that's separate from what's allowed in terms of the development standards. And so I would suggest that we turn it over to council staff, have her walk through the part of the packet that talks about consolidation. I can mention at least what I have put forward on what I think we should introduce, or could introduce through an SRA, what I intend to introduce as an SRA, because that's where it would actually be addressed. And then we can discuss, debate, ask questions, raise concerns. I'm assuming that there's not going to be unanimity on exactly where to land on those issues, but I think that would be the easiest, clearest way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and I know we're going to talk about that more, but I mean, Mr. Cronenberg said some of these don't have to be subdivided, I thought I heard you say. So it's not even,
Right, and especially for lot consolidations, and it's noted here, and I think Ms. Nadeau got this maybe from me when we were talking to some of our subdivision staff and our record plat guys, that
just be a
you
lot
do
line
have, yeah, it could be a lot line adjustment, it could be an elimination of a lot, if someone wants to put a pool on the back of their house, because you can't have an accessory structure on a different lot. So there's some minor tweaks to how we do review some of the lot consolidations. And some of those, like that one, wouldn't go to the planning board for their approval because it's removing a lot. You're not adding, you're actually taking away density than adding to it.
okay.
Is there zoning text language that we could include in this that would address specifically the way in which consolidation can work?
Yes, so there are, I guess, two different issues here. There is the concern about the creation of through lots in order to take advantage of this. But separately, as Councilmember Joanna noted, there are flag lots and through lots that already exist. So what you could do is, in the SRA request, and that letter is attached to the staff report, that would address not allowing the creation of through lots and flag lots. So taking that highly unlikely to a not allowed for the ones that do not already exist. So that would be the SRA that was requested. And in the ZTA, you could expressly say that existing flag lots and through lots are not eligible.
Which is a decision point, discussion point in the packet.
Right, okay.
So that's my suggestion, is there's the consolidation question, and then there's the packet item, specifically related to the zoning text language.
Right.
Which, is of the existing one, including presumably the lot that you were mentioning. That's an existing flag lot, and we can decide, should that be eligible, that one and all, because they are unique by nature and do create some issues that we can't quite address. So why don't we continue on with the packet and move forward as discussed?
So which, I think maybe the easiest is to deal with the existing ones first. So this is at the top of page 10. So council.
So just so everyone's clear, we're going forward in the packet, just if anybody is following, we're going forward in the packet to page 10, that's skipping over. We're going to address this because we've gotten ahead in the conversation, which is fine. I just want to make sure everyone can follow. We'll address that because that's the existing examples that we've discussed. And then we'll go back to the question of consolidation and, talk through that, and raise those issues. So let's go ahead and continue. Page 10.
So council staff, the reason these were separated out is the idea that the existing ones are never going to go to planning for subdivision, re-subdivision consolidation because they already exist. So that's why council staff believes that change can be made in the ZTA. And it would just say, when we're talking about eligible lots in that section of the zoning ordinance, it would expressly say flag lots and through lots are not eligible in those development standards. So that's the amendment proposed by
Councilmember
council.
Fani Gonzalez.
Agreed.
Okay. Councilmember Joando had already mentioned that he believed that. I also agree with that. And so we will 3-0 an amendment to expressly prohibit those as eligible lots, flag lots and through lots. Those are existing flag lots and existing through lots, just to clarify the difference. So that would satisfy, maybe take a little bit of the homework assignment off. That's why I was suggesting, we may be disposing of this issue, and so I don't want to ask for follow-up items if we're not going to include them anyway. All right, that has been disposed of.
Thank you, and I will cross off the to-do list how many flag lots. You're very welcome. Okay, so then the second question is the letter that Chair Friedson had sent, that's attached to the packet, requesting an SRA that would say that future through lots and flag lots would not be eligible for this. And that one would also include language that would limit the number of consolidated lots eligible for this to 3 lots. So those are the two pieces. One, no, you cannot create a through lot and flag lot to take advantage of this. And 2, the maximum number of lots that can be consolidated for optional method workforce housing development would be 3. So this is raised here because it's related to the ZTA, of course. An SRA will be needed, so now that council staff has received the request, it will be drafted, introduced, go through public hearing, have another committee session, but it's in here since it answers some of those pending questions.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not voting on that. It is included in the packet because it's a discussion point. It's not a zoning text issue, and so it's not something that can be amended or addressed through the zoning text amendment. I am putting that forward. We'll have an opportunity to debate and discuss that when it comes up, but I have asked staff to draft that. My intention here is the same as I will say from the previous votes that we took. This is a way to codify what the intent is, that the eligible lots and the way in which we're intending this to move forward and what should be included, should stay true to what we intended to be. And saying it's highly unlikely but possible is just not an answer that I think is particularly comforting and clear to folks. And I think that clarity lack of clarity is concerning to folks, understandably. So I think we can clarify it. I think we can make progress without trying to achieve perfection. And this is what I had put forward. It also is transparent in the sense that we're saying exactly what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and up to what is possible and what is not possible from a legal standpoint. So that's why I had put it forward, and why I think an SRA is appropriate. We have consistently heard this more than just about anything else, and so I think this will help to clarify what the intent is and what it isn't.
Could we ask one clarifying question? So I think the image on page 7 might help clarify this as well. So the through lots will not be allowed for this, so that's, I think, very clear for everybody. For the flag lots, like if you look at the image on page 7 of your packets, there's a flag lot, which is like a flag, and then there's a lot.
Page 7, so people here can see it.
Ooh, I know how.
Never mind. Go ahead.
So in front of the flag lot, there is another lot that fronts onto the street. We just want to get clarity that we are saying that the flag lot is not eligible, but the lot that fronts onto the street as a regular lot would continue to be eligible?
Yes, I believe that is the intent. So if you take a rectangle and you have and you cut it in half and then have that lot in the back would still have driveway access, that's the flag lot. It's literally shaped like a flag. But there's that square lot, that's the house right in front of it, that fronts on the lot and is not a flag lot. That lot would still be eligible. But under the SRA that's being introduced, you couldn't consolidate those two and build. You'd only have that interior lot to build on.
Yeah.
And I think this is the issue I was raising, which is why I think the exercise would still be helpful to know to have some sense of the flag lots, because the question was around eligibility and could there be an apartment building built, or like the where do they exist and what's currently eligible, and just so that, again, to the question of transparency of where this could happen.
Yeah, yes, and I realized as soon as I nodded at Ms. Nadeau saying thank you, I realized we have to do it anyway, because if we're going to
Change
update
the
the
number of
map
eligible lots.
and the number of eligible lots, my running count, we were at 2472. We eliminated 27 properties that were on the controlled major highways, so we're at 2445 right now. Some of those are flag lots today. Those will come out of that
to do
universe.
the
So we have to look at it.
The ones that
anyway.
are eligible,
Yes.
that are in this scenario, and the ones that are not eligible for consolidation. Or you'd have to identify them
I'm just
anyway.
trying to understand, your concern is the eligible lot that is actually abutting,
Right.
that's in front of a flag lot, that's a flag lot to the
The
neighborhood?
one he just described, that was still in, and I think that's what you just described.
Yeah, we heard we heard two different sort of ideas here. One was to not allow the flag itself, and one was to look at the regular lot that is in front of the flag lot and whether that should be eligible or not. I think Councilmember Javando's case was about what if somebody builds an apartment building on the regular lot fronting the
The
corridor,
person that's across, that comes out of their front door is looking at the back of the apartment building.
in the flag lot.
Yeah, right. So we should just be on it, just like that's, could happen here, and that's just what it is.
You're saying that the rear flag lot faces
Right,
the
in
major
that, in that,
highway? No, it faces the neighborhood road, but it has a flag to the major controlled highway.
go ahead.
That's,
I think the concern is not not that real, and I'll explain, because what that interior lot, the lot that fronts the road, that the flag lot that, goes around, essentially, is a single lot. And, you could see what we showed, you're not gonna be able to get an apartment building on a single R60 lot. And so what you're gonna get is a structure that's as large as a single-family home that you could build today, whether it's a duplex or a triplex. So you're not looking at anything bigger than what could be on that lot in front of the flag lot today.
yeah, are you because the only other option would be to say that the eligible lot that in any other circumstance would be eligible should be ineligible just because the lot behind them happens to have an access point or a very narrow driveway to the major thoroughfare. What we've said is you shouldn't be eligible just because you have a teeny little driveway that goes to the main thoroughfare. That feels like an end run. That feels like you're getting an advantage, to be eligible or to be, but when you aren't really abutting as a property that area. But to say you're ineligible just because the property behind you has a narrow driveway, is that what
Well, I'm
you're
not
suggesting?
arguing eligibility or ineligibility. I just want to make sure we're clear on where the flag lots are and what could happen near and around them. That's what I'm trying to get to.
We will identify the flag lots that were among the 2472 parcels that were originally identified as being eligible. We'll identify which ones are. It'll take us a little while, but, we'll identify where they are, and if there's anything that we see that's of significant concern, we can raise that too, but,
Trying to get at
yeah.
here. And if we calm some fears through that exercise, I think that's a good thing, so, thank you.
Okay, so you're going to do it anyway. I was thinking the same thing after we did it when we talked about the new maps and the new eligibility, so I think that makes sense. Okay, any other questions on that? The SRA hopefully will have introduced relatively soon as staff can put it together. It's a fairly simple SRA, but nothing is simple. So appreciate the indulgence there. Okay, let's continue unless there are any questions or comments on this from colleagues. Okay.
So next up is number 6 on page 10. This is about the workforce housing and affordability specifically. So ZTA 2502 requires at least 15% workforce housing units with a minimum of 1 if you're doing a triplex. And you'll see a table on page 10 because these income levels are updated regularly. And the last effective date was April 11th, 2025. So currently, the maximum income for a family of 4 under workforce housing would be $196,500. And then the staff report talks about the workforce housing process. The overarching headline is an agreement is made with DHCA. DPS will not let you pull that building permit until those affordability requirements are met. And that threshold, I should have mentioned earlier, sorry, is at or below 120% of area median income. During the March 31st work session, the sponsors noted that this was about increasing supply as well as affordability, and there was discussion of naturally occurring affordable housing. So planning staff had provided data regarding the sale of naturally occurring affordable housing, the abbreviation there is NOAA, properties in the last year. So of the 48 sold in 2024, the average sold price was $827,100. A note here, that housing is not actually deed restricted, but there are efforts such as the Nonprofit Preservation Fund that try to keep those prices low and keep those in the market. And we also have a right of first refusal law in the county as well. So that data, while a small sample size, it was only 48 sales, did suggest that the sales price for homes along the corridors have a somewhat lower price based on the median. Councilmember Jawando had requested a breakdown of that housing by zone and county area, and then Chair Friedson had also asked for a comparison of the non-owner occupied sales with the owner occupied sales, because also a lot of those properties are rentals. And from there, I'm going to defer to Mr. Voney, who pulled this research for us.
Lisa Gavoni, Planning Supervisor, Montgomery Planning for the record. So as requested by the last committee session, we did a couple of things with data in our GIS system. So we looked at sales comparison of the applicable single-family detached parcels, owner-occupied sales, non-owner occupied sales, the difference, the percent difference, in all sales of applicable parcels, just to create some comparison of these numbers. I'll be honest, we didn't really find any meaningful trends in a lot of this data. I think it had to do with, these are pretty small sample sizes when we're dealing with that, even bumping it back a couple of years. So I can pause there, and unless you want me to go through the other two.
You can go through.
Sure. So we also looked at the percentage of single-family detached units sold last year. As you can see, for applicable parcels and countywide for owner applicable, only about 2.2% for applicable parcels sold last year for owner-occupied compared to 2.9%. So really not a meaningful difference. When we looked at non-owner occupied sales for the applicable parcels, they weren't that different than the owner occupied. What is different is countywide numbers. Interestingly, 4.6% of non-owner occupied parcels did sell last year, but that is a countywide number, not the applicable parcels. So that was probably the most meaningful difference that we found. And then just looking at all single-family detached parcels, the applicable parcels and the countywide, again, the numbers were not that different. And then we have our new planning geographies that we're undergoing restructuring that will be taking effect July 1st. So we looked at those geographies and kind of broke down sales by those different geographies, East County, West County, and Up County. There weren't a lot of sales in the Up County, not enough to really pull anything from. There was only one. And then in East County, there was 127 sales compared to 50 in the West County. And you can see that there were some differences in prices. What's interesting is in East County, there was about an average of 73,000 difference compared to a median of 100,000 difference. And then if we look at West County, the difference for the average is about 155,000 compared to about 62,000 for the median. So those are just some of the trends that we looked at to see if we can find any meaningful trends, and we really didn't find any.
Thanks for that work. Any questions on this? Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, this is, I guess, a good point to bring up, because I don't think these are in the, I was trying to see if we saw these in the packet, but I'll just raise it here because it's related to this issue. I had brought this up because, again, this drives at one of my main concerns with this approach, which I continue to have, that folks that live in these homes and rent in these corridors are in homes that are priced less and cost less to live in than other parts of the community. And you mentioned the higher number in the eastern part of the county. One of my main concerns here is that if you're this could, while it won't have a dramatic impact, we're talking about a universe of 2,500 home, or 2,500 and change, depending on what's going on with what we do here today, it could disproportionately impact some of those renters and homeowners. So there were some standards, there were some comments made and suggestions, and I think these came from the Friendship Heights folks, which I really appreciated, around asking to adopt the state standard that the sale of a workforce housing unit be controlled by 40 years. I think this would be an appropriate place to offer that idea. And I'll just mention a couple of them here. The other was prohibit the use of these workforce housing units for short-term rentals. As another, again, I'm trying to not, if we're trying to not displace folks that I'm concerned about, and this is going to pass in some version, how do we limit and maximize the benefit and minimize the potential detriment? And the other would be require that the workforce housing set aside apply to duplexes. Again, I know that has not, we've talked about that before, but again, if one of these is converted, if you take one of these 1950s era homes and convert it to a duplex in the eastern part of the county, there is no requirement for workforce housing, just to be clear. And so, and it will absolutely be more expensive than what was there. So those would be the three that I would like to raise. We could take them one at a time or whatever, but I don't think the first two in particular are not, I would hope there might be some consensus on those.
Can we first talk about what would be included in the ZTA? And so I am open to the idea of workforce housing have a longer control period. I'm not sure that this zoning text amendment should change that control period. If the county executive wanted this to happen, he clearly now, it sounds like, wants it to happen once there's a proposal on the table. I would be open to that. And the way that this is being moved forward, it would be able to be adapted and to adopt to any changes in the workforce housing control period that we have. So if that is changed, which I generally would be open to, it would be included in this. But whether we would have a different standard in this proposal than in the underlying workforce housing, I'm just not sure the justification for that personally. I'll also note, just to be very clear, the original zoning text amendment that was introduced, that has been referenced time and time again, would have impacted 2,300 additional non-owner occupied units, 2,300. So the idea of displacement, the idea of renters being moved out, we just have to be intellectually consistent and honest about what we're talking about here. There are legitimate questions about what we should allow and how we should allow, under what circumstances we should allow. But I just think we have to be consistent with what we're talking about, and we have to decide what we want to do. I think also on the workforce housing question, the control period, I would imagine that originally when they created the workforce housing standard, the idea, because this is generally the industry discussion, was that after a 20-year control period, it becomes naturally occurring. It becomes workforce type of housing from an affordability standpoint, because if you have a healthy housing environment where you're actually building enough housing, a 20-plus-year-old unit should be renting at a lower rate. And so at the 120% area median income rate is about what a 20-year-old new rental unit should be renting at. Unfortunately, we have not built enough housing in Montgomery County. We don't have a healthy housing market, and so that's not necessarily the case. That's why, on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to the fact that I think there was probably a justification for why the 20-year control period was put forward, the idea of after 20 years, the market will allow this. We need the restriction before the market will do it on its own. Unfortunately, we have created a market, and it's government intervention that has created this market, of not having enough supply of housing, which has created that to be an issue, and that's why I'd be open to a change to that. But I don't think we necessarily have to change it in this zoning text amendment. We can change it generally, and it would impact this zoning text amendment and anywhere else we do workforce housing. So I just think it's important to note that. Sure. Councilmember Fontaine Gonzalez.
Less focused, please. Please, less focused. So I'm gonna say two things, so we can please move on. As you all know very well, the county is working with the planning department to analyze the MPDU program, the workforce housing, and that report is coming out probably at the end of this year, at some point in the fall. And we're gonna look into requirements and preservation and all that good stuff then, not through the ZTA. Okay, focused. Two, let's please stop pretending that the homes that we have today that are, cheaper than the ones inside the neighborhood, that they are somehow untouchable. Anybody can today buy any property and upzone and build a mega home right now, and or this place.
We're going to ask the people in the audience not interrupt. Thank you.
Anybody can do that right now. So just let's please stop with the lies, and let's please stop with the pushing for things that are not true. Anybody can buy a home today and upzone and build and change a house that was built in 1950 and create a Mac mansion today.
But these are our homes.
And anybody has the right to sell if they want to sell. We are creating choices in places that are transit-oriented, which is key, right? Near public transit. That's what we're doing today. Please, let's not politicize this issue and move on. That's it.
So if I could just, and I would appreciate.
Councilmember Joanna?
Yeah, I know members of the public care about this, but it is confusing if you shout out as well, even if you're shouting out with something that I agree with. So, the proposal was, again, I was asking that we adopt the Maryland standard, the same state of Maryland standard, that the sale price of a workforce housing unit be controlled for 40 years. That's the Maryland state standard.
Can I just get clarification, just if I can
Sure.
jump in? Ordinarily, that would be handled through an executive regulation, is that correct?
Yes, if the ZTA still wants to reference it as workforce housing in the existing workforce housing program, the control period would have to be changed in Chapter 25A in a bill unless the ZTA decouples and does a different affordability program or standard.
So so that was going to be my next question. So the ZTA, if it references the current program, you have to change the current program in the bill, or it could require separate standards just in and of itself.
Yes, the issue would be if you create so for example, we occasionally have zoning ordinances where it says if it's X number of AMI at X number of years. When we do that, DHCA doesn't yet have a program in place on how to administer that. So it would require a little more work to make sure that they'd know how to set that program up, know how to approve those units. So that's why it was tied to the workforce housing, and therefore the change would have to be in the bill, unless you.
And they are already working on adjusting the workforce housing standard. It was supposed to be done this summer, I will note. There's some staffing changes there, which we're a little sad about because they had a staff member who is very professional and helpful, and we appreciated her and we wish her well. But that is delaying to give the benefit of the doubt to the executive on this particular aspect, and that's delaying when we're going to receive it. But we will receive it, and it is tied to that unless we create a different standard that they would have to come up with a different administrative process.
Right. And those changes would have to, I think obviously the problem is like we're going through this now to tie it to workforce housing, and if you don't make those changes, there's no guarantee that those changes would be made by that bill or in the future, and whereas we could require it right now, even if it's a little more onerous for DHCA. I just think if we're saying that this is a good policy and we're moving forward with this now, why not put it in place now? Would you also think, Ms. Nadeau, that would be the case for the short-term rental prohibition?
So short-term rentals are not currently allowed unless it's your primary residence. So right now, if you wanted to rent out for less than 30 days, it would have to be your primary residence already.
Okay, so that would effectively not allow that. Let's say that again. So yeah, because we did the short-term rental, it would have to be your primary residence.
Yes, it currently already has to be your.
Yeah, in fact, we've gotten, if you remember from the public hearing, the opposite feedback as well, to say the restrictions and standards that we have on ADUs and others that we put in place that you and I worked on in the previous iteration of this committee, that those should be relaxed because there is actually a racial equity component to that of allowing somebody to monetize their property and who it impacts and who it doesn't, and that has been raised to us as well on the other side of it. So we've received testimony, one on, restricting it, on one on further relaxing the standard here and in other proposals as well.
ADU, very different from short-term rental.
No,
in the
no, we
sense
dealt with ADUs related to short-term rentals specifically. This was a
Right.
key discussion
Right,
point.
right.
I'm just
But I'm
noting
saying, I'm not
that
talking
we have a
about-
standard for
There are
that.
people that want to use, yes, there's a whole argument, a discussion about how do we make ADUs more accessible and more usable, but I'm just saying on the short-term rental side. So you're saying, I'm just asking on that piece in particular, do you have the same view that it would be a change to the workforce housing program itself?
On the short-term rental piece?
Yeah.
No, so currently, even if you have a workforce housing unit, you're allowed to do a short-term rental, but only if it's your primary
Only if it's your
residence.
primary
So you
residence.
can't buy a property to do nothing but Airbnb it with anywhere in the county.
Right, so it's not as relevant in that context, okay. And then what about we could change the duplex requirement?
That could be changed in this CTA,
Yeah.
correct?
You're saying to create a 50% requirement, then one of the two units would have to be a workforce standard.
Workforce housing. So I'd like to propose that. I'll remove the second one, but the first two, let's go with number 3 here, see if we can get that agreement on that one. That one of the duplexes created would have to be a workforce housing requirement. Again, at the standards that we put here, these are not super deeply low-income housing here. I appreciate the work that was done in the packet. We're talking about, for a family of 4, just under $200,000.
Are you calling on a vote?
Yeah, I'm asking if there's a,
I don't think there's support for that. The reason, I'll just go back to the creation of the zoning text amendment. There has been a lot of discussion, including some of the people who are in this room who I've talked a lot about this issue with, and I very much appreciate. There was a question of actually the opposite, of whether duplexes should be allowed by right. The idea that if you can tear down a house and build a much, much larger house, should you be able to do the exact same thing with the exact same setbacks and lot coverage standards and every other dynamic, and should you be able to do that in the same process, which is not going through the optional method development process, which is not a particularly public process, which is putting a sign out front like you were renovating, doing a large renovation of your house, no different, but tearing down and doing it, as happens over 200 times on average in neighborhoods and communities all across the county. My view was, I thought it was appropriate, given the fact that we are making significant changes, to have everybody go through the same process. And we have gotten pushback on that at the very least, duplexes, which are not being allowed everywhere, or not being allowed within residential neighborhoods, only on the corridors, should be able to go by right. And we discussed and we decided, and after, quite a bit of thought, to keep everything consistent. Having said that, if you set the workforce housing standard for a duplex, which is already being held to a much higher standard than a tear-down house, which makes a duplex much less likely because it's much more expensive to build than a single-family house. The reason why it's much more expensive to build is the most expensive aspects of that house you have to do twice. The plumbing, the kitchen, the bathrooms, those are the expensive parts of the construction. You have to double all of those costs. So it's not twice the price, but it's closer to twice the price than it is to half the price in terms of building a duplex. And we're making you go through a much more cumbersome, much more expensive process. If you then add on top of that the workforce housing standard, you've made that standard 50%. And that is incredibly high. And that would make duplexes not happen. So if the goal here is to say that we don't want these to happen, which I understand, if that's what people want, that's the idea of, pause or stop anything from happening, then, this would be the appropriate path to take. If the idea is to allow duplexes as part of the mix of what could be allowed, if property owners decide that this is what they want to do, then setting a standard that high for duplexes would make it prohibitively expensive and impossible. So it's really a threshold question of whether we want this to happen ever or we don't want it to happen. And if the goal is to stop it from happening, setting a threshold that is so high and so unrealistic to occur makes it prohibitively expensive. So from my perspective, I don't, the way we addressed this was, holding it to the higher standard through the optional method of development process to deal with the concerns that had been raised through the community, to handle those on a case-by-case, lot-by-lot basis, on an individualistic basis, setting the affordability standards so high to make them financially infeasible, I think is a bridge too far if the goal here is to make some progress.
Yeah, if I could, I think there's often in this debate, there's been a discussion that it's the choice between doing nothing and something. I think, again, we are a very diverse county. I don't agree with that math, that if you take down a home that's already already more affordable and build something that's brand new, and one of which you can charge whatever you want for, and the other which has a modest workforce housing requirement, that's not a financially feasible thing. I don't think that's correct, and it would depend on where it is in the county, and that's what. So saying that one of the two has to be for workforce housing, when this whole proposal is saying it's a workforce housing proposal, and then if you say one of the two has to be workforce housing, you're unreasonable and you want nothing to happen. I don't think that's intellectually honest. I mean, it's just then don't call it workforce housing. I mean, because you're saying build duplexes, and I would, the thing that I previously introduced, you could build them by right. You brought that up. Yeah, if they're actually going to be affordable, at least one of them at some level, that might be worth the deal. And if you look at it by neighborhood, it might be worth the deal.
Just to clarify, you can't have a workforce housing standard and allow by right. And in the previous proposal, there were no affordability standards, zero. And 2,300 more of the units were rent or owned. So I don't want to get into like a full-on debate here, but it's not fair to say that, I'll
didn't have one hearing on my bill, and that's 5 years ago. That's,
if you would like to,
could have gotten there. But if we don't,
if you're requesting it now, I'm happy to hold a hearing on your zoning text amendment.
I would love to actually.
If you want to pursue that,
about actually building affordable and workforce housing with this project, and not just putting it on as a gloss over what it is. But my colleagues clearly don't want to move forward. I would just ask it be noted that I made the proposal in the packet so it could be discussed at full council. And I appreciate it.
I leave open the opportunity, if you would like to have a conversation in this committee, to do a work session, to work through your original proposal, and we can discuss and debate and decide if we want to move forward on that. I am more than open to having that conversation and will allow you to decide whether or not you want to do that. So I'll leave that open to you to move forward. It's proposed by Councilmember Jawando. There's no support from the other committee members on this standard. All right, let's continue.
So number 7, this is on page 12 still, is somewhat related to this. It was a planning board recommendation for an administrative site plan approval process for duplexes or triplexes, based on, as Chair Friedson had noted, that they are more expensive processes. Council staff notes here that this would would likely have to happen the way the administrative subdivision was described earlier, where it would go to the planning director, and if an objection was received, then it would go to the board. Council staff alternatively recommends reduced fees or application requirements for duplexes and triplexes, so that there's still that public hearing process for the duplexes and triplexes. So those are the options regarding an administrative process for the smaller units, or smaller building types.
Councilmember Fleming Gonzalez.
Thank you for that. I would love to favor the administrative process, but I also realized that we didn't talk about it with that process. We didn't talk about it with our community. I held quite a few town hall meetings and civic association meetings on this proposal, and I always said planning board, and I don't feel okay. I don't feel comfortable just taking that away. I think that's part of giving people peace of mind. But I do agree with council staff of having this idea of reducing the fees, as you mentioned. I think that's a good one. With that said, if you want to deal with the administrative, I will support you. I just feel like I feel turned about this one, just because I wasn't always I always told people it will go to the planning board. It does go to the planning department for sure. So unless we can say both, unless we can say something like it can go as a administrative issue, but if anybody complains, it goes to the planning board, but if in that case, it will still have a reduced fee. That could be a good one.
I'm going to stick to the zoning text amendment as we have been discussing it, as we have gone around the entire county, the entire community, explaining what is in it, what is not, what was intended. We did not put forward an administrative expedited process. I understand why that is being suggested, but I am personally not comfortable with changing what we have shared. If we want to take a look at the fees later, that's not part of the zoning text amendment. I'm happy to take a look at that. Of course, any option to make housing more affordable is something that I'm very interested in doing. But from a process standpoint, the idea of changing the standards that we have been talking about for months with the community is not something that I'm comfortable with. On the goal of refining fine points and clarifying, but not dramatically changing what we're talking about, I'm not interested in making a change on that at this point.
Okay, in agreement. On the fees, how would that work?
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Thank you.
I was just going to add, that is something that the council would ask the planning board to do. That would not be in the ZTA itself.
Okay, so we can take that up separately. This would be a change that has been suggested. There's no interest in a change among the committee. There's consensus to not change it at this point, so let's move on.
So next is a slightly more technical proposed amendment. This is on page 13, number 8, about the minimum lot size. So the planning board had recommended reducing the minimum lot size for a townhouse to 1,000 square feet. As introduced, the minimum lot size varies by zone. So for R200, it was 2,000 square feet, in the R90, 1,200, and in the R60 and R40 was the 1,000 square feet. The reason for this recommendation from planning was a 2,000 square foot minimum lot size would be a pretty large townhouse. It'd be a 20 by 100 foot deep. And then also the development standards say it's lot area per unit, and planning board recommended say per unit average, with the understanding that the corner unit is sometimes bigger, so you would average it across the stick, as they are called. So council staff's recommendation here is to not reduce it as far as 1,000 feet, but in the R200, where it was 2,000 square feet, to reduce that to 1,500 square feet, which is still a sizable townhouse, but doesn't require a very large townhouse. And then council staff also agrees with saying a per unit average, since we understand that those corner units are sometimes a little bit bigger. So a modest compromise.
I'm comfortable with that.
1,000.
No, 1,500. So not going to the full 1,000, going to 1,500 as a compromise, and then allowing for the averaging to reflect the corner.
And just in the R200, the other ones would stay the same.
All right, 3-0. That is a change. Just, I'm trying to note the changes versus the discussion points that we didn't support a change. This is a change, but it's a fairly modest refinement to it, and that's 3-0 on the committee to make those two changes, averaging in the 1,500, only in the R200 zones.
Next is, so in creating this ZTA, a triplex was not previously defined in the zoning ordinance. So ZTA 2502 adds a definition for a triplex, but failed, my apologies, to add the actual triplex standards. The original recommendation was to make them the same as the recommendations for townhouse living, which would be I'm going to switch it, per unit instead of per bedroom. Something I want to note here, because this came up in the parking discussion, is last year, the council enacted ZTA 2310, which exempted parking requirements near transit. Councilmember Jawando had asked how many parcels that would be, and it would be 24% of the parcels in this ZTA, and that table is on page 14. But the recommended amendment here is just to add parking requirements for triplex, to make sure that someone building one knows where to
It's a
look.
technical change to
Yes.
add parking requirements for triplex without objection. That is a change, but it's a technical addition.
Okay.
3-0.
So there's more discussion on parking here. This came up at the last work session as well, that we have many different development requirements in the county, and they often overlap. There was a lot of testimony received about concerns with stormwater management and how that interacts with parking. So I think the easiest way to explain it is we have our parking requirements, and then as you saw from those diagrams earlier, there's also stormwater management requirements. For stormwater management, you want pervious surface, so if you have more parking, there might be less room for that. As we heard very helpfully at the last work session from DPS, that stormwater management waiver is not like our usual variance process. DPS is very strict in making sure that developers really do provide as much stormwater management as possible and have to follow the state law requirements, which the county cannot override. And then in addition, there is a tree canopy law, which requires planting a shade tree. Many applicants will opt to instead pay a fee, which is currently $470 per tree, and then the county's Tree Montgomery program will use that money to plant a tree as close to the disturbed area as possible. So the request from the committee was for the departments and planning and council staff to work together on solutions for how to make sure all these different pieces flow together. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Sharma, who actually has some diagrams of what some of this looks like.
Thank you, Ms. Nadeau. So just as we did diagrams for the lot consolidation, these are just some diagrams showing what the current requirements per this ZTA would be for parking for each of the building types on each of the four zones. Important to note here that not all zones have this requirement. There's a transit adjacency reduction in parking, and that might apply to about a quarter of these lots. So if we go through the slides, each of the zones, what we've done here is there's a typical lot that shows what the size of the lot is, the setbacks, and the area unencumbered by the setbacks, and the lot coverage, maximum lot coverage. Then there are potential different configurations in how parking might be provided on the lot on the midsection of the slide. And you'll see some checks and X's. If you see a check, it means that that configuration can fit and still has enough space on the lot to build a building on the lot. Where you see an X, it means that the parking in that particular configuration is taking up enough land that it is not really feasible to build a reasonable building on the lot. So we've done this exercise for duplexes, triplexes, and 4-unit buildings on R60, R90, and R200 lots. And this should be a quicker presentation than my last one, and in the interest of time as well. But essentially what we found was that in the R60, you could conceivably fit a duplex on one lot and provide 4 parking spaces. Those spaces could be on the lot as surface spaces or be within the building as garage spaces. When you go to the next slide, you see that for a triplex, however, you need at least you were showing 6 parking spaces here. It becomes difficult to fit 6 parking spaces on an R6, standard R60 lot and still have enough space left to fit a building. And it doesn't really change if the parking is in the building or outside. You still need the circulation space and the turnaround space to get in and out of those parking spaces. So it is unlikely that on a single lot that is 6,000 square feet that you'll be able to fit 6 parking spaces and 3 reasonably sized triplex units. And by deduction there, if you go to the next slide, the same is true for a 4-unit building as well, because you need more parking for it. So things change when you go from R60 to R90. So in R60, duplex can fit, triplex and quadplexes and more units beyond 4 are very hard to fit, unless there's a no parking requirement and you can reduce the parking. When you get to an R90, in the next slide, you can kind of see that you have a little bit more space to work with. We can go to the next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Yep. You get a little bit more space. The duplexes definitely fit, and if you flip to the next slide, the triplexes can also fit. So you can have 3 units, 6 parking spaces to fit on an R90 lot. And we can just sort of cycle through this pretty quickly. Quadplexes, they're tight, but they might fit on an R90 lot. And then if you go to the R200 zone, on a 20,000 square foot lot, you can definitely fit a duplex with its parking, a triplex with its parking, and a quadplex with its parking. So each of the zones behaves a little bit differently. The R60 is obviously the most constrained, and it will be difficult to fit 6 parking spaces and 3 units on an R60 lot to meet the standard parking requirements. If the parking requirements are reduced or not, there's not a minimum, then it's a different story.
So the planning board's recommendation had been to either create a parking standard of 1 space per dwelling unit, or to use the number of bedrooms, which is what we do for multi-unit living. Multi-unit living is an apartment building typically, and this would incentivize smaller, more price attainable dwellings. There are a few options on the table here for the committee, and I'd highlight particularly for triplex, because that is where, per the previous vote, you want to create standards that do not currently exist. So one option is have these be subject to planning board approval, where based on the zone and meeting certain requirements, you'd be allowed to ask planning board for a reduction. Another option is to use planning board's recommendation of 1 parking space per dwelling unit. And then option 3 would be to base it off the number of bedrooms, similar to multi-unit living. An example there, for multi-unit living, a 1-bedroom requires 1.25 spaces, a 2-bedroom, 1.5, and then a 3+ bedroom, 2. So those are the 3 options for the committee in terms of parking, both across the board, but particularly for triplexes.
Any comments from committee members?
Thank you. I think what makes the most sense is the final option that you said, the multi-unit option, which is number 3, right? Yeah.
Councilmember Joanna?
I'm sorry, Ms. Nadeau, could you just restate the option, what you're proposing here in the options? What page, you're on page?
Yes, sorry, this is at the
I
bottom
was
of
reading
page
something else, I'm
15.
sorry, but I heard you, but I want to make sure I fully heard you.
Of course, it's a long section. So it's from the bottom of page 15 into page 16. So at the bottom of page 15, that first sentence, the planning board recommends a standard of 1 space per dwelling, or setting the parking based on number of bedrooms, similar to multi-unit. And then at the top of 16 was council staff's third alternative suggestion, which was making the approval, any requests for reduction in parking subject to planning board approval.
So if there was a request to not have you'd have to come and get planning board approval
Yes.
for it? And that's what you said you were for, or no? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
And you mentioned the multi-unit?
Yes, so the multi-unit living is what Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez had suggested, and that one goes by number of bedrooms. I should note here, workforce housing units, you can reduce your parking requirement by half. So right now, if you make no changes at all, and you use the townhouse living standards, a triplex would have to have 5 parking spaces, because it would have 2 per dwelling unit, and then 1 for the workforce housing unit. So that's currently what the ZTA would say without these parking adjustments, and then the reason for the adjustments is the diagrams you saw.
Right. And your suggestion was that if you, not changing the standards necessarily, but if you had a case where you needed to go lower, you'd have to get planning board approval.
Yes, that is one of the options, yeah.
I like the idea of having the standard, and then if there needs to be an exception, you go ask for it, so there's at least a process. So that's where I would be.
That's where the committee is, 3-0, that sounds like.
Okay. So I realize I should probably have read them. So the way that one would work is if you want a reduction, it would be subject to planning board approval. That would only be in the R60 and R40 zones where there are those smaller lots. I'm reading this in case there are tweaks. And only if it's for 3 or more units and there was no subdivision and at no more than reducing 1 space per unit, so the board couldn't say 0. And then lastly, within a half mile of transit would be the criteria that were in the packet that I believe the committee agrees with.
Okay, 3-0, thank you for reading that out.
Can I just add, so it would, yeah, thank you. So it would be for 3 units or more. I'm curious about the no subdivision piece of that, because for some of these, for triplex, there may be subdivision to allow them to be each independent, 3 separate parcels that are owned by 3 different owners. And so would we want to, like, do we need to include the subdivision requirement in there?
Yes. I believe maybe better language would be if there was no
Consolidation.
Yeah, that's consolidation.
The idea that I think was trying to be addressed is that you can't reduce a larger parcel that would, exact, okay.
Okay.
But if you're making smaller parcels, that would exacerbate, not reduce the issue that you're trying to address, so.
Thank you.
Consolidation, I think that's a good language tweak, or is everybody comfortable with that? Okay. 3-0 on the committee for that.
Okay, and then what is the standard then, that for the triplexes? Was it the multifamily, multiplex, or is it?
Yes, so that would leave the standard for the triplexes as the townhouse living, which is per unit, unless this waiver was granted.
So the question was about the previous decision and how that impacts the current decision, and that has been clarified, just so everybody understands what that exchange meant. Okay, let's continue.
Okay. So next is continuing on with driving. Would shared driveways be permitted? This is a question that we've received in testimony. Shared driveways are usually a private agreement between 2 property owners or something created by easement. I will not recreate property law for everyone explaining what an easement is, but it's an agreement that's usually locked into the deed. So for single-family teardowns, a driveway permit is required if you want to construct a new driveway or affect the apron in any way. Usually this is worked out with DOT and with planning and DPS while projects are being approved. In addition, the ZTA already limits driveway access to 1 driveway per street frontage, unless an agency with jurisdiction over the right-of-way approves more. And then 2, the ZTA requires all off-street parking to be behind the front building line. And the reason for these 2 provisions is to make it safe for pedestrians walking down the street. It provides greenery and visual relief so you don't have what look like large parking pads in the front of the building. So a suggestion here, because Really, the answer is it's a private agreement, but also that planning board would be probably unlikely to approve a project that was using a shared driveway. But I know we'd rather be able to say definitely and not like unlikely. So one suggestion here is that if there is a shared driveway, that applicant either needs a written signed agreement with the neighbor saying they're okay with this application, or they will be required to create a new driveway.
Yeah, I mean, this seems relatively obvious that if you're sharing a driveway, you need the explicit agreement of the person you're sharing it with to use it for a different purpose, and if you don't, you have to come up with an alternative arrangement that addresses the issue. So it seems fairly common sense to me. Councilmember Joanna?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, there was a couple people that wrote in on this, and it makes common sense that you'd have to, at a minimum, have your neighbor's agreement to do that, but if not, you'd have to create your own driveway. So I think that's what I heard you saying? Yes. Yeah, and so that makes.
If you're using it for the purpose of saying you're satisfying the requirement, the other person who owns it has to say, that's okay. I mean, yeah.
If they don't, you can't.
And if you don't, then you got to come up with another way to satisfy the requirement.
Right.
Great.
There was some language, I'll just add, there was some language, this might come up, I just want to mention it for the planning board, you probably saw this. It was a redeveloping eligible lot with a shared single access driveway shall provide for the abutting property a separate dedicated driveway with a minimum length of the existing driveway for the exclusive use of the abutting properties, residents, and visitors. That was some language that some folks had sent in. I'm not saying, now, that would be for the second half of this requirement. Obviously, if you get agreement, that doesn't matter, but so how would that be, how would the own driveway standards be? That was an example of a standard. I read it for that purpose. How would that be interpreted? Say you had an application, your neighbor does not agree, and you have to build your own driveway. What are the standards and requirements along with that? What does that govern? Is that part of the application to you all that you would have to consider?
Yes, access points would be part of their application before the board, and the driveway would presumably have to be on their own lot, not the neighbor's lot.
So that
And
language.
you'd have to satisfy the parking requirement. You know, that's part of the off-street, I mean, part of a driveway is satisfying the off-street parking requirements. I mean, that's generally the reason why, besides people like a driveway if they have a garage to get to their garage, you know, or to get onto their property, it's really to satisfy the parking requirement.
All right, just wanted to, you guys would be considering that if they were building the standards to be something similar to that. Can I just get you to say yes? If it's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So agreed, that is an addition, just to, you know, as in the interest of trying to transparently say what's new, what's different, what's adding, what's taking away. This is a clarification of, you know, what is should be common sense of how neighbors have to deal with a shared driveway situation, but we would put it into the language to clarify it because the issue has come up. So 3-0, agree to that language, that is an addition, and it's a clarification.
Okay. So lastly, our technical amendments. These are usually to all the tables you see. One is adding triplex to the building type columns in the other zones. Sorry, this is on page 17 of the staff report. 2 is adding triplex to the table in the column with all the building types, and then also expanding the site coverage criteria. It was captured for townhouses and apartment buildings, but not duplex and triplex. So cleaning up some of those tables, and those are technical amendments consistent with what was discussed today.
Okay, without objection, we'll 3-0 take the technical amendments, which are clarifications. Councilmember Joanna.
And I just have a couple things I wanted to raise for the committee, potentially for our next session, that didn't explicitly come up in the packet, which was very well done and thoughtful as always, Mr. Nadeau. The issue of development standards for workforce housing projects. This was, again, something that was suggested, a confirmation that all the structures must comply with compatibility requirements, that they're adjacent to single-family homes, that they adhere to the county's established compatibility standards. One of the examples of that was a 45-degree angular plane for roof height, for example, in a transition between new and existing development. Where does that fall
Yes.
in this?
So that section, I think it's 418, it might be 438. It's the compatibility requirements. The reason that was in the CR, thank you. The reason that was not included in here is the max height under workforce housing is 40 feet. So you just use, the reason that was in there is usually you're expecting like much higher buildings next to single family. Here, because the heights are similar, that's why the compatibility requirements were not repeated for this.
Great, but it would be, that, it's under that, but that's, thank you for clarifying that. The other was the historic designations. This was an issue that was brought up, that lots that have a national or county historic designation or located within a historic district, there were some who suggested that those are currently not eligible for workforce housing.
No, so those lots are eligible, but they would have to go through the historic preservation process, which has a lot of requirements. Those also go to the planning board, so they'd have to meet all of the typical requirements you have to meet if you live in a historic district and are
addition to-
developing, in addition to all of these requirements.
Theoretically.
Similar to like a tear down, they could be torn down too, technically, but they would have to go through the historic
They'd have to go through the
preservation
process, yes.
standards if they were ever torn down.
Not that was, that's being suggested.
So they're not, it's not being, the historic standards are not being eliminated.
Actually. No, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, it's not that simple. Some of these historic homes are really untouchable. Even if the owner wants to, you want to add.
Yeah, the tear down wouldn't be, if the structure itself is what's identified as being historic, then it wouldn't be eligible to be torn down, if it's on our master plan of historic preservation. However, any changes to it, potential change of use, if you wanted to convert it, to a duplex, that what you do on the inside and is completely possible, and you would have to go through an application process with the Historic Preservation Commission. And they go through their lengthy process, and then it would come to the board, the planning board, for our process through this zoning text amendment. So it's just, there's process there, but it would be feasible, just the tear down is not.
Yeah, I was just trying to explain the same standards for a tear down of how that would work would exist here, but maybe I misstated that. But I see how I was misstating. What is underlying the question, because I have heard it quite a bit too, just to be clear, is the question and concern of whether or not the historic standards would be eliminated. Basically, like, what this proposal would override the historic requirements and restrictions that exist. And what was, I believe, was attempting to be clarified is all of those restrictions and standards that currently exist, the process that's in place for any changes to historic property
Still exists.
would still exist, would have to go through that formal process, and that would happen first, because you can't
Right.
approve any other dynamic unless you get explicit approval from historic preservation.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same
appreciate
page.
that. The other, just two other things that were brought up, and I can, again, if we need to come back to it, we can, but I just wanted to raise them. The requirement around, there was some, one thing we didn't discuss, the requirement that parking be located behind the front line of the building should be removed, that's something that we didn't really discuss, but it was brought up by MCCF and others. It just, this is the idea that, like, residents on interior blocks that back up to the corridor developments are concerned that their backyard may abut an adjacent parking lot. When the stormwater issues, we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. So is there anything?
Yeah, so
add
this
on
is the discussion about how the reason the ZTA currently requires the parking behind the front building line is for pedestrians who are walking on that main corridor, so you don't have multiple cars pulling out onto these busier roads, and so that it's green. So you see trees and shrubs and lawns, so that's why typically, and probably even without this requirement, that's why typically planning asks for parking to be behind the front building line. And I will clarify, that's the front building line, that's not the side lot necessarily.
I appreciate that. One other thing that came up that I wanted to raise is just the changing nature of corridors themselves. It was brought up that there's, on Connecticut Avenue, for example, there's no longer continuous single bus operation down that corridor. That was one of the changes proposed, and which is unfortunate, but points north and south of East-West Highway, and how that potentially has the impact on this idea that we're building on corridors. I think these are important aspects of what we're discussing here, and I just wanted to plant some seeds as we move forward, presumably, to full council. So just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it works now is the ZTA lists specific road types. So if those road types are ever changed, that would actually happen in chapter 49, which is the streets and roads chapter. So it's something that I'm sure when planning goes through and council goes through, and they have that list of what different road types are, certain ones could fall on or off the eligibility list based on that. It was approved pretty recently, so we don't expect major changes anytime soon. But that's how the road types would change, and that's the only thing that would change what was eligible, because that's what the ZTA lists roads by, is the road type.
Yeah, and just to clarify, but that wouldn't change the 100 feet of master plan width of the 3 or 4
No,
existing
no,
travel.
that requirement is locked.
Really, yeah, so just to be clear, it would change what would be eligible if it also had more than 100 feet of master plan width and 3 or more existing
Vehicle lanes.
travel lanes.
Yeah, and I would just clarify that those road classifications can change through a master plan process, whether it's the master plan of highways and transitways or an individual area master plan that comes before the council, the committee, and then the full council you could potentially change the designation through that process.
So we could have done this all through a master plan process. I got it, understood.
It could continue to happen through a master plan process. This puts it in place so that it can happen that
I
way.
understand. Thank you very much. That was the last one I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Okay, any other items that folks wanted to raise? You raised 2 that I was going to mention and have us discuss. I'm glad you did, so thank you for that. I don't think there are any outstanding discussion points. There's probably more discussion that could take place at full council, I imagine, but with that, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of the zoning text amendment as amended at committee, please indicate by raising your hand. That's 2. All those opposed, that's 1. The zoning text amendment is going to be forwarded to committee with a committee, or to full council with a committee recommendation of 2-1. And we will follow up and talk to the council president and come up with a time for that. And I'm sure there will be continued engagement and discussion. Thank you. Thank you to planning. Thank you to Mr. Sharma in particular for moving his plans. I don't know if it had to do with him not trusting his colleagues to present his detailed diagrams, or whether or not he just desperately wanted to be here for this illustrious occasion, but we appreciate it nonetheless, and thank you for those who are here engaging, who took our suggestion to not interrupt as we were discussing and debating. We do appreciate your being here and your engagement in the process. With that, we're going to move on to the next item on our work session. We'll welcome our colleague, Councilmember Mink, and we are going to move forward with zoning text amendment 2506, a vehicle service filling station. We'll have the planning board stay but reshuffle, and the planning staff shuffle for Mr. Berbert, who's going to join us, I see. I will, before turning it over to council staff, I'll turn it over to the district council member if she would like to speak to this at all at the outset at a high level, and colleagues if they have any comments, and then we can turn it over to Ms. Nadeau to move forward. We just asked, we're still carrying out business here, if we could ask private conversations to be handled outside of the committee hearing room, we would appreciate it. Thank you for respecting the process, and thank you for your engagement. With that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Mink.
Sure, appreciate it. Yeah, I'll just note that this CTA is to add clarity to a situation where there is not already clarity. So hopefully it's fairly straightforward. And with that, I'm going to hand that back over for discussion. Thanks.
All right. I don't see any colleagues wishing to speak to this, so we're going to get into the substance of the issue and talk about how technical zoning text amendments can be and how specific they are, and I'm sure we're going to discuss very specific details. With that, Ms. Nadeau, take it away.
Okay, so ZTA 2506 does two things. First, it clarifies the setback requirements for a filling station by stating that a filling station that dispenses at least 3.6 million gallons of gas per year, that the 500-foot setback from certain uses is measured from the hose. And then second, it amends the applicability of a non-conforming use to a filling station if there is a subsequent use. So we had a public hearing on June 10th. There were speakers both in opposition and support. Testimony in support noted that this clarifying amendment does not change the distance requirement and would provide filling stations with flexibility. And then several letters were received in opposition, noting that the current language in the zoning ordinance was hard fought, and they expressed environmental as well as public health concerns. We received all the usual impact statements. First, one from the planning board recommending approval with two amendments. First, to require underground storage tanks to be set back 500 feet from the specified environmental features. And second, that non-conforming use language does not change the original 500-foot measurement. The planning board also reviewed a climate assessment and found no significant climate-related impacts due to the CTA, since it is just clarifying the distance requirement and not changing it. Lastly, we received a racial equity and social justice impact statement from our Office of Legislative Oversight, which found that it could not anticipate the racial equity and social justice impact, but did note that the adverse effects of living near a gas station are most often felt by communities of color at different income levels, particularly due to levels of air pollution, and OLO actually recommended two amendments similar to the ones that the planning board had recommended. So I'm going to do a hopefully brief history lesson here on how this language got in the code. First, in July 2012, the council passed ZTA 1207, and that's what required that a new filling station that dispenses more than 3.6 million gallons of fuel a year be located 300 feet from the lot line of a school, park, playground, daycare, or outdoor use that's categorized as cultural, entertainment, and recreation. If you go back through the legislative history for that, this is at the top of page 3. At introduction, it was actually 1,000 feet, and it was reduced to 300 due to recommendations from the California Air Resources Board. And then the 3.6 million gallons, which I know seems very random. The reason for that number is that's what the EPA had used when they were determining where schools are sited. As a bit of level setting here, our average filling station only sells about 4,000 gallons of gas per day, so there are not that many gas stations that do 3.6 million gallons. This is not changing gas stations across the county. It's typically bulk retailers like a Costco or a Sam's Club, and then highway vehicle stops like a Wawa or a Sheetz. So that was 2012. Then in 2015, the council passed 1507, which kept the 3.6 million gallons per year, but changed it to 500 feet from those listed uses, and also clarified that the environmentally sensitive areas are wetlands, streams, rivers, and floodplains. The concern at that time was about tanker trucks unloading fuel and then idling cars waiting to fill up. So the reason we are here today is in the zoning ordinance, that 500-foot setback is measured from any filling station facility, but the word facility is used in the definition of a filling station, so it was unclear to developers and applicants where that 500 feet is being measured from. DPS had noted that they could measure from the canopy or the pumps. Others believed it was measured from the lot line. So the reason for the CTA is to clarify where we are measuring from. What CTA 2506 does is it measures from the fuel dispenser, which is understood to be the hose when it is parked, not being used. The hose when it's not being used. That's where that 500 feet would be measured from under the ZTA. In addition, what ZTA 2506 does is says that that filling station will not become a non-conforming use if one of those uses, such as a park, playground, daycare, outdoor entertainment, comes in afterwards. So the way non-conforming uses work is you cannot expand or enlarge once your use is non-conforming. And a sort of strange quirk of zoning is that means this filling station would be placed there and have a 500-foot buffer, but then an apartment building is built within the 400 and could get approved because the apartment building doesn't have that restriction. So this says that the filling station will not become non-conforming because somebody moved in afterwards. So that's what the ZTA does. Council staff does want to note here, I know I was asked to clarify this, that there's a lot of testimony received about the Costco in Wheaton. Based on council staff's review of that site, it would not be eligible for this ZTA. One, because it's already there and it would not meet these requirements. So that is the ZTA before you. I can pause if you want me to before going into several proposed amendments.
Any questions, comments? I think we can just dig into the proposed comments. It's pretty technical in nature, so I think just getting into the technical dynamics would be best.
So the First Amendment on page 4 is from Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez to measure the 500-foot setback from the use boundary. So to explain this a bit, it's different from a lot line. If you picture a gas station that also has a large retail use, then the intent at the time of the 500-foot setback, there was a lot of discussion about idling cars, not about the parked cars for the retail use. So the way this amendment is crafted is you'd measure the 500 feet from the boundary of the gas station use, not the entire site, which adds a bit of a compromise. So you're not adding like a large retail store as well to that 500-foot setback. I did confirm, because all the filling stations in the county are conditional uses, so these applications go to OZA, and when a conditional use application is submitted, it's very clear on those plans what the boundary of the use itself is, so this should be doable for them to implement.
Sure. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I'm just going to say very quickly, I lived through this ZTA as a planning board member. I have a history. The queuing is real. And I'm in agreement. I will vote for it as long as this amendment is approved. It's about protecting people who live in the neighborhood, people who who are there 24/7. This is their community. If I don't want it in my district, I don't want it anywhere in Montgomery County. So this will be the only way for me to support this. And actually, I would even say, this is what, the Kensington Heights community took this issue, not just in front of the planning board and the county council, they went to court on this issue. And the queuing that we are addressing on my amendment was one of the reasons why they won this battle, right? So I'm hoping that you will both agree on this, and so we can move forward and ensure that this happens. So
Appreciate that. All lead sponsors are equal, but some are more equal than others. As Animal Farm reference that I like to use, let me turn it over if Councilmember Mink has any comments on this.
Yeah, I think that the ZTA as written is reasonable. It's taken from the point of, where there is an environmental concern that is relevant to the surrounding area. And it's a point of clarity that provides a predictable place for developers to measure from, which I think is really necessary and critical. So it's critical for development in my own district, but also for other districts and other locations as well.
Can I just clarify something?
Sure, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
It's not the environmental concern, it's people breathing this when cars are queuing. It's a health concern. It's not environmental, it's health concern. Big difference. That's why the court sided with the community, so.
I appreciate this. I've struggled with this a little bit, thinking through it. I do think the clarity is important, the question of what the clarity does. I'm not aware of the issue in your district resurfacing or being relevant here. The property owner in question being interested in moving forward with anything in the, broader Wheaton area. I do think we have to figure out where to measure from and come up with a reasonable location. I do think the queuing is a little bit of a challenge. While I understand that as an issue, it certainly is something that we should be concerned and focused on. I've also thought about other things that have a lot of queuing, like our hubs and food distribution sites, which have large numbers of cars that queue. And I'm a little bit concerned in the current environment that wasn't necessarily as much of a focus when those discussions were taking place, that this becomes a broader conversation of where car queuing occurs and how we handle car queuing. So that, I'll just say from my perspective, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that being used as the primary focus and primary standard. I think there are some unintended consequences that we may run into. So I appreciate where the concern is, but I think we have to find the right dynamic. I do think that the planning board has offered a different compromise that I would be open to, and I want to talk about that one as well. So I'm not sure that I'm ready to support this particular proposal. While I appreciate where it's coming from and the interest from the community, I've heard from many of them as well, and I understand the battle scars from the past on the previous issue. I do think we can land on a compromise, and I do think that I'd be interested in at least discussing what planning has put forward as an alternative kind of third way to what was originally introduced, what is being proposed by Councilmember Fana Gonzalez, and how we move forward. With that, let me turn to Councilmember Jawanda.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was going to ask for something similar, the relationship of the three options here, or the three amendments. I think it's often helpful if we talk about them in context. Isaac, I am certainly not, I agree with Councilman Friesen, I'm a co-lead on this, but yield to, and I'm excited about it. I think of what, the opportunity, sometimes you have a ZTA or something that because you think it's going to help a specific area, but you want to create a standard that's applicable countywide. And I think that's that's what the balance here is. I do think we want to make sure this project can move forward. And that's really important for the community that I think is going to take advantage of it right away. But yeah, I would love to hear from the planning department about or council staff before I make any determination on this amendment. I was also intrigued by their thoughts on this.
All right, so why don't we, it sounds like there's not currently support for that. It's been, proposed, but we can leave that out there for the moment. Why don't we move on to the second discussion point, because it is related. It's essentially, a different standard for the same underlying question and issue. So why don't we move on to that, discuss that, and see if there is any level of consensus there, or if we can find a fourth way in the discussion as we move forward. So let's continue.
So the recommendation from Planning Board is that the setback for the environmentally sensitive areas, such as wetlands, streams, floodplains, that for those uses, it's 500 feet from the underground tank. The idea being environmental features are underground. And so the language, which is at the top of page 5, would say any filling station designed to dispense the 3.6 million gallons per year must locate all fuel dispensers 500 feet from the uses such as dwelling unit, park, school, daycare center. But for the environmentally sensitive areas, it must be 500 feet from the underground storage tank. So it gives you the hose for some of the uses, and then the underground tank for the environmental use.
Which would be further away.
Which would be further away, yes.
Yeah, just to be clear. Okay.
Okay, anything from planning to add to that? I mean, I think it's fairly self-explanatory of what you're proposing and why, but do you want to speak to that?
Ben Berbert with Planning. I think just very quickly, the reason we thought about this is, we sort of saw the 500 feet from the fuel dispenser as sort of the airborne point of source, and that the queuing could be seen as also coming, or they're queuing up to get to that point. From the point, as mentioned, of the environmental features, it's usually water driven. that's kind of in the ground. What the biggest source of that would either be a spill from the pump above ground, which is already being captured, or a spill or leak from the underground tank, which may be slightly offset from where the pumps are. But that really, once it's underground, is more of a water feature and less of an above-ground feature. So we thought just focusing on environmental features for that added from the storage tank, and then everybody or everything has to be set back 500 feet from the pump, we thought was a good compromise to add some additional protections for the environment without, expanding it indefinitely. That was kind of where we came up with the recommendation.
I think that further clarification, it goes beyond what was originally introduced. I think that, to me, seems like a reasonable compromise. So I would personally be supportive of that.
Same.
Councilmember Fani Gonzalez?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, so that'll be a 2-0 vote with an abstention from Councilmember Fani Gonzalez. We'll note that she had, raised her amendment. It didn't have support, this had support, so, this was the alternative to it, if that's fair to you. Okay, all right. We have the 500-foot setback, so let's continue that onto that.
So the last proposed amendment from the planning board was clarifying that while the filling station will not become a non-conforming use, such that those additional uses could end up being built within that 500 feet, while the filling station could still expand or enlarge, it must maintain the 500-foot setback from either the fuel dispenser or the underground tank, as it was just amended.
Without objection, just a clarification, that makes sense to us, so that's 3-0 without objection, with the enthusiastic technical support of the lead among leaders of the ZTA and district council member. I'll just say, and this was alluded to earlier, we're not doing this for one site. This is a standard for the county, but the interest is in making sure that it works for a particular site that we know could happen and we want to happen. And the county is investing hundreds of millions of dollars of incentives and creative financing in order to facilitate this process, because we believe in East County development, because we know that there has been a lack of investment in the East County in particular, and we are trying very hard through land use policies, we're trying very hard through broader public policies, and we're trying very hard through intentional investments in the East County to have the type of development that we want. I'll note that there is support from that community for this standard where we know it will happen, which gives me comfort in that. I think we've made a reasonable compromise here to address at least some of the concerns. Understand it's not all of everybody's concerns, but welcome to land use for all of us who have the black and blue marks to do it. But I do think that this will allow us to take one step closer to seeing the type of East County comprehensive mixed-use development, creating housing, jobs, and opportunities where we desperately want it and have been investing time, resources, and energy in as intentional a way as it was intentionally not included for far too many decades. So really excited about that, really appreciate the work of Councilmember Mink in advocating for her community, and appreciate colleagues for the thoughtful discussion here. This is an important issue, and I'm glad we're able to find a reasonable compromise. With that, I think that disposes of all of the substantive issues here. We'll take a vote on the zoning text amendment as amended. All those in favor of the zoning text amendment as amended, please indicate by raising your hand. That is 2. All of those opposed, that is 1. It will be recommended to full council by a 2-to-1 vote. With that, that's all the items, as far as I know of, that we are here to discuss today. Really appreciate all of the engagement among our community and all of the work of the planning staff and planning board and our council staff. It's yeoman's work, and I really appreciate it. And with that, stay cool, drink lots of water. It is oppressively and very dangerously hot outside. So please take care of yourselves. Please be healthy, and we are adjourned. right. Onward.